The observation deck of the Galactic Concordance Station hummed with the usual symphony of 1,000 different species going about their business. Commander Zhkar of the Vraxian Empire stood with his scaled arms crossed, watching the security feed with an expression that could only be described as bewildered concern. "They're doing it again," he muttered to his second-in-command. "Lieutenant Vess on the holographic display before them?" Two small figures crouched in what was clearly meant to be an intimidating hunting stance, their fur a mixture of golden brown and cream bristled along their spines. Their tails, still disproportionately large for their small bodies, lashed back and forth with predatory intent. Tiny claws extended from their paws as they stalked forward, eyes locked on their target with the intensity of apex predators preparing for a kill, the target in question. A floating maintenance drone that was simply trying to polish the corridor floors. Emma Jackson stood at the end of that same corridor, her arms full of data pads and her auburn hair falling loose from its regulation bun. She had just finished a double shift in the xenobiology labs and wanted nothing more than to return to her quarters for a hot shower and 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep. Then she saw them. Oh, for the love of... Emma set down her data pads with a sigh that came from somewhere deep in her soul. "Artemis, Apollo, what have I told you about terrorizing the station equipment?" The two forlorn cubs, each no bigger than a standard house cat from Earth, froze mid-stalk. Their ear tufts swiveled backward in what Emma had learned to recognize as their caught-in-the-act position. Artemis, the female with the distinctive white patch over her left eye, recovered first. She dropped her hunting stance and sat down with exaggerated innocence, as if she had been sitting there the entire time and certainly had not been preparing to pounce on expensive Concordance property. Apollo, her brother, held his position a moment longer. His yellow eyes remained fixed on the drone, his haunches still coiled with predatory tension. This was, after all, serious business. The floating metal thing needed to understand who ruled this territory. "Apollo," Emma said, her voice taking on that particular tone that every mother in the universe seemed to possess, the one that said she was not angry, just disappointed, which was somehow infinitely worse. The cub's resolve crumbled. His hunting stance collapsed, and he sat down next to his sister, both of them now the picture of feline innocence up on the observation deck. Commander Shkar watched as the human woman walked toward the cubs, his claws unconsciously extended, every instinct screaming danger. Felorans were classified as a Category 4 predator species. Their adults stood nearly 8 feet tall, possessed strength enough to tear through reinforced steel, and their bite force could crush bone like brittle candy. Even the cubs were dangerous. Last month, young Apollo had accidentally gouged a 3-inch gash in the hull during a particularly enthusiastic play session. "Should we intervene?" Lieutenant Vess asked, her tentacles coiling with anxiety. "Protocol states that. Just watch," Shkar said quietly. He had seen this before, but it never ceased to amaze him. Emma reached the cubs and crouched down to their level. For a moment she simply looked at them, and they looked back with those impossibly large eyes that every predator species seemed to possess the better to track prey in low light. Then, without any sign of fear or hesitation, Emma reached out and scooped both cubs into her arms. "You two are incorrigible," she said, but her voice had gone soft, affectionate. She pulled them close to her chest, and before either cub could protest, she planted a kiss on each of their fuzzy heads on the observation deck. Shkar heard Lieutenant Vess make a sound like escaping steam, her species equivalent of a gasp. Artem Ice and Apollo, the fierce hunters who had been seconds away from launching an assault on station property, melted in Emma's embrace. Artemis began to purr, a sound that resonated through the corridor like a small earthquake. Apollo's tail, which had been lashing with predatory intent moments before, now wrapped contentedly around Emma's wrist. "You can't keep hunting the maintenance equipment," Emma continued, adjusting her grip so she could carry both cubs more comfortably. They were getting heavier another month, and she wouldn't be able to carry them both at once. The thought made her a little sad. The drones are just trying to do their jobs. How would you like it if someone tried to pounce on you while you were working? Apollo made a small chirping sound that seemed to suggest he would actually enjoy that very much. That was a rhetorical question, Emma said, but she was smiling now. She began walking back toward her quarters, the cubs still cradled in her arms. Their earlier predatory intensity completely forgotten. "I simply do not understand humans," Lieutenant Vest said. Still staring at the screen, Commander Zhkar clicked his jaw in agreement. 5 cycles ago, when Ambassador Cathar's delegation arrived, they brought those cubs as a demonstration of Faloran youth training. Do you remember? Of course. The ambassador explained that Faloran cubs begin combat training at just 2 lunar cycles old. They practice hunting stances, attack patterns, territorial behaviors, and they gifted the cubs to Dr. Jackson as a diplomatic gesture, Shkar interrupted. A test, I think. To see how humans would handle raising a warrior species. And instead of training them or placing them with military personnel, Vest gestured helplessly at the screen, where Emma was now using her elbow to activate the door panel to her quarters while still holding both purring cubs. She treats them like children, Shkar finished. Human children. Inside her quarters, Emma finally set the cubs down on her couch. Immediately, they began to wrestle with each other, rolling across the cushions in a tangle of fur and claws and chirps. She watched them for a moment, feeling that familiar mixture of exhaustion and affection that every parent understood, her communicator chirped. She glanced at the screen and saw a message from Ambassador Cathar, requesting a meeting to discuss the progress of the young one's training. Emma sighed. This conversation happened every few weeks. The Felorans, for all their warrior culture and predatory nature, seemed genuinely baffled by her approach to raising Artemis and Apollo. They sent her detailed training regimens, combat scenarios appropriate for cubs this age, dietary supplements to enhance muscle development. Emma had thanked them politely, and then proceeded to completely ignore every single recommendation. Instead, she fed the cubs a balanced diet that the station nutritionist had helped her develop. She played with them, yes, but she also taught them boundaries and rules. She gave them puzzle toys that challenged their minds, not just their hunting instincts. And when they did something wrong, she corrected them with patience rather than dominance displays. "All right, you two," she said, moving toward the food dispenser. "Dinner time, then bath time, and then we're all going to sleep because some of us have been awake for 20 hours. The wrestling stopped immediately. Both cubs' heads popped up, their ears forward with interest. Food was a universal motivator. As Emma prepared their evening meal, a carefully balanced mixture of proteins, nutrients, and the vitamin supplements that the station vet had prescribed. She thought about the first time Ambassador Thar had visited after gifting her the cubs. The massive Faloran had towered over her, his battle scars visible even through his thick fur, and asked how the warriors in training were progressing. Emma had been holding Artemis at the time, who had just woken from a nap and was still drowsy and warm. Without thinking, Emma had been stroking the cub's head, smoothing down her fuzzy ear tufts. "They're doing wonderfully," Emma had said. "Artemis is very curious. She loves exploring and getting into spaces she shouldn't. And Apollo is brave but gentle. Yesterday he found an injured micromoth in the ventilation system and was so careful bringing it to me." The ambassador had stared at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Finally, he had said, "You speak of them as if they are offspring, not students." "Well," Emma had replied, shifting Artemis to her other arm, "they are just babies, aren't they?" The memory made Emma smile now as she set down 2 bowls of food. The cubs attacked their dinner with enthusiastic chomping sounds, their tails high and happy. 3 months had passed since that conversation, and Ambassador Cathar still seemed puzzled by the whole arrangement. But Emma had noticed something he apparently hadn't. Artemis and Apollo were thriving, yes. They still practiced hunting stances. It was instinctive for their species. And yes, they wrestled and pounced and displayed all the typical behaviors of young predators. But they were also gentle when they needed to be. They understood no and wait and gentle touches. They had never once used their claws or teeth on Emma in aggression. Even when she had to do unpleasant things like trim those claws or give them medicine, More importantly, they were happy. Their fur was glossy and healthy, their eyes bright with intelligence and curiosity. They slept peacefully curled against her at night, purring their rumbling purrs. They greeted her with chirps of joy when she returned. From her shifts, after dinner and the usual. Protest-filled bath-time Apollo had strong opinions about water and wasn't. Afraid to share them, Emma settled onto her bed with both cubs. It was their routine now. Artemis claimed her spot against Emma's left side, while Apollo sprawled across her stomach, his head on her chest. "Tell us a story," Artemis demanded in the chittering language of her people. The universal translator made it sound like a small child's request, which was exactly what it was. "Please," Emma corrected gently. "Tell us a story, please." "Please," Artemis repeated dutifully. Emma began to tell them a story from Earth, a tale about a brave little mouse and a friendly lion, adapted and modified to suit her audience. She had learned that the cubs loved stories, especially ones where small creatures showed courage or cleverness. As she spoke, her fingers automatically stroked their fur and the purring began. First Artemis, then Apollo, until the sound filled her small quarters like a lullaby. Up on the observation deck, Commander Shkar was writing his weekly report on human behavior, a study the Concordance had commissioned to better understand the species that had joined them only 5 cycles ago. He paused, considering his words carefully, and then typed, "Humans possess an unusual capacity for what they call nurturing behavior. Where other species see predators or warriors, humans see children. Where we recognize threat displays and combat stances, they see a need for guidance and affection. This behavior appears to be instinctive rather than learned, and it extends across species boundaries in ways we are still working to understand." He saved the report and pulled up the security feed one more time. Emma's quarters showed 3 heat signatures on the sleeping platform, 1 large, 2 small, all clustered together. "Sleep well, Dr. Jackson," he murmured, and turned off the display. In her bed, Emma felt the weight and warmth of the 2 cubs pressed against her. Tomorrow she would face more questions from the Faloran delegation about her training methods. Tomorrow, Apollo and Artemis would probably try to hunt something else inappropriate. Tomorrow, she had another long shift in the xenobiology labs, but right now, in this moment, everything was exactly as it should be. 2 small predators who had been practicing their fiercest hunting stances just hours ago slept peacefully in her arms. They were safe. They were loved. They were growing into themselves not just as Felorans, but as individuals. Emma kissed each fuzzy head one more time, then closed her eyes. In the morning, the cubs would wake her at an ungodly hour, demanding breakfast and attention. They would probably knock over something valuable and get into spaces they shouldn't. They would practice their hunting stances and stalk the maintenance drones and generally be the handful they always were, and Emma would scoop them up, kiss their heads, and love them anyway, because that's what mothers did, across every species in the galaxy. They looked at their children small, fierce, imperfect, and wonderful, and they loved them, not despite what they were. But because of it, the cubs had practiced their hunting stance. The human had just picked them up and kissed their heads, and in the vast, complicated cosmos of the galactic concordance, this small act of interspecies affection was perhaps the most revolutionary thing of all. Outside the viewport, stars wheeled in their eternal dance, and 1,000 species went about their 1,000 different lives. But in one small quarters on a diplomatic station at the edge of known space, 2 predators and 1 human slept together in perfect peace. The galaxy, Emma thought drowsily, could figure out what to make of that tomorrow. Tonight, her babies were sleeping,